On October 4th, 1957, the world watched in awe and fear as the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first man-made satellite, into space. This little metal ball, smaller than 2 feet in diameter, launched a space race between the US and USSR. Not wanting to fall too far behind, President Eisenhower ordered the Navy to speed up its own project and launch a satellite as soon as possible. So, on December 6, 1957, excited people across the nation tuned in to watch the live broadcast as the Vanguard TV-3 satellite took off and crashed to the ground 2 seconds later. The Vanguard failure was a huge embarrassment for the United States. Fortunately, the Army had been working on their own parallel project, the Explorer, which was successfully launched in January 1958. But the US had barely managed to catch up before they were surpassed again, as Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space in April 1961. By this time, President Kennedy had realized that simply catching up to each Soviet advance a few months later wasn't going to cut it. The US had to do something first. And in May 1961, a month after Gagarin's flight, he announced the goal of putting a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
Born 1912 in Poland, von Braun was first exposed to the mysteries of rocket travel by reading a book called Rockets into Planetary Space. From a very young age, Wernher was groomed to believe and quest the theory of space travel. From that point on, it was obvious to Wernher space travel was all he wanted to think about. The problem was, it was very expensive. In 1932, he met Captain Walter Dornberger of the German Army. After meeting Captain Dornberger, who also came to the U.S. as part of Operation Paperclip, he hired Wernher. He was extremely impressed with Wernher's enthusiasm. This is a great example of how Wernher learned at a very young age how to manipulate opportunities to further his dream into space. In 1938, Wernher joined the Nazi Party and a year and a half later received a commission into the SS. He was known to wear his SS uniform only once. The year 1945, Tuesday, May 8th. It is VE, Victory in Europe Day. For the next few weeks, American soldiers will be making their way home, all except for the ones who are left to collect the spoils of war. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, soon to become Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, was in charge of collecting as many scientists, engineers, bankers, etc. they thought would be useful to U.S. intelligence. 2 days after the report of Hitler's death, Mr. von Braun and 120 of his scientists surrendered to the U.S., and of course, they were welcomed into the fold. In all, there were about 1,600 men and their families ushered into the United States to save us. Wernher von Braun was a genius marketer. His first move was to start writing articles on space for Collier's magazine, a very well-respected and trusted publication at the time. When he wrote these articles, he incorporated the assistance of two other paperclip scientists, Heinz Haber and Willie Lee. Wernher's job was to write about the vision, and the other two filled in the technical information. Again, Wernher has placed himself in a visionary role. After being published, Wernher was contacted by Walt Disney. It seems Walt needed him to be a consultant on a few projects. Then on March 9, 1955, the Man in Space Disney show was first aired, starring Wernher von Braun. Combining Disney's popularity and animation capabilities and von Braun's space vision and charismatic personality, it could not fail, and it didn't. Soon everyone knew how we were going to get into space and on the moon. Every Sunday night, we could get filled with more propaganda, and we could not get enough. Now Wernher has the trust and encouragement of we, the people. All he needs now is to get the military involved. On October 4th, 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik into orbit, and to make sure the rest of the world knew, they incorporated a beeping signal anyone could tune into as it crossed over them every 96.2 minutes. The feeling in the United States from this time forward was fear whenever Russia was involved. On December 6, 1957, the U.S. Navy launched the Vanguard TV-3 satellite, but the rocket failed on the launch pad, sending everyone in the United States into an even deeper fear. Next, in steps, yep, you guessed it, Wernher von Braun to save us all. You see, Wernher and his Nazi scientists at the same time have been working covertly, building their own rocket. Covertly means in secret, with no one else's knowledge. On July 31st, 1958, Wernher and his team successfully launched Explorer 1 into orbit. Can you imagine the feelings of we, the people, now? The guy who has been on TV explaining how we are going to get into space and on the moon has now saved us all from total destruction. This put Wernher in a perfect position to lead the United States into the race for space. On July 29th of the same year, 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was formed by Wernher and his gang.
They were just a few weeks away from a launch that would send them into Earth orbit for 14 days. Led by Purdue graduate Gus Grissom, the three-man crew suited up for a series of tests in the spacecraft.
41-year-old Gus was a seasoned veteran of the group.
One of the last original Mercury 7 astronauts in the program. He was the first man to fly in space twice, and the trusted veteran NASA chose to command the first Apollo flight. The Apollo program set out to finally achieve the monumental goal President Kennedy established 6 years earlier, to send a man to the moon and return him safely by decade's end. In the early morning of Tuesday, July 18th, Gus climbed into Liberty Bell 7. The one-person spacecraft was so cramped that it was said that you didn't ride in it, but you wore it. The Liberty Bell sat 7 stories high above a Mercury Redstone rocket. The nation's eyes turned to Launch Pad 5, waiting for the countdown to begin. Tucked into one of Gus's spacesuit pockets were 2 rolls of dimes, souvenirs from his boys, 11-year-old Scott and 7-year-old Mark. Through his observation window, Gus could see the cloud cover thickening. 10 minutes before launch, flight controllers called for a 5-minute hold. The hold went from 5 minutes to a half an hour, and then, after 4 hours of waiting for the weather to clear, the mission was scrubbed. 3 days later, on July 21st, 1961, at 7:20 a.m., the Mercury Redstone rocket, filled with 18 tons of fuel, launched Liberty Bell 7 and Gus Grissom toward space.
Roger, this is Liberty Bell 7. The clock is operating. Okay, it's a nice ride up to now. All in clear. Roger. Okay, the fuel is go. About 1 1/4 Gs. Cabin pressure is just coming off the pitch. The oxygen is go. 26 amps.
The acceleration was smooth until the spacecraft broke through the sound barrier, causing Liberty Bell to vibrate violently. 2 minutes into the flight, Gus was traveling at over 4,000 miles per hour. Gus watched from his window as the sky went from light to dark blue and then dissolved into the blackness of space. At 118 miles above Cape Canaveral, he looked down at a mesmerizing view that only 2 other men had seen, the Earth from space.
I'm trying a yaw maneuver and I'm on the way. There's such a fascinating view out the window, you just can't help but look out that way.
He fired the retro rockets, positioning the spacecraft for re-entry. As Liberty Bell descended back down into the Earth's atmosphere, the G-forces increased rapidly.
These are building. We're up to 6. There's 9. There's about 10.
The pressure at that force makes speaking and breathing difficult. The spacecraft slowed and the G-forces decreased as it pierced the Earth's atmosphere. The blackness of space faded back to blue sky. At 12,000 feet, the main chute deployed, and Liberty Bell landed safely in the Atlantic Ocean. From launch to splashdown, the 15-minute flight was an unqualified success. Gus bobbed up and down in the sealed spacecraft, recording switch positions in his log as he waited for the recovery helicopters to arrive.
So he was sitting there when he heard a dull thud and saw the hatch skip off across the water. And immediately, of course, water started gushing into the spacecraft. While all this was going on, Gus was treading water and sinking lower and lower under the waves. Waves would break over him. He swallowed a lot of seawater. Gus said he never moved as fast as he had in his life in getting out of the Liberty Bell, and it immediately began sinking under the waves. The recovery helicopter managed to hook on to Liberty Bell 7 and actually started pulling it out of the water. But unfortunately for the helicopter pilot, he received a warning light on his engine panel that there was going to be an engine failure on his helicopter, and so he had to cut loose the Liberty Bell 7 and it sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Fortunately for him, a second helicopter had come by, dropped a horse collar, and he swam hard, got into it, and was winched aboard.
An official inquiry into the hatch self-triggering corroborated Gus's story and found him not to be at fault. But without the major piece of evidence, the spacecraft, the report failed to eliminate doubt for some within NASA and among the test pilot fraternity. A harmless and honest admission to a reporter that he was scared only fueled the speculation that Gus panicked and blew the hatch prematurely. Gus was frustrated with the hatch controversy and being blamed by some for losing the spacecraft. He used that disappointment as motivation and was now more determined than ever to set his mark on America's space effort. Gus Grissom became the first man to go into space twice. The Molly Braun splashed down in the Atlantic near the Grand Turk Islands after a successful 4-hour, 53-minute, 18-orbit flight. 9 more Gemini flights followed, and by the end of 1966, NASA was entering into the final phase in the race to the moon, the Apollo missions. Gus was concerned that the same level of thoroughness that was a hallmark of the Mercury and Gemini programs was being compromised in favor of expediency with Apollo. The development of the new spacecraft was plagued with technical glitches.
He was extremely concerned about Apollo. My folks were down at the Cape 2 weeks before the accident, and he told them that it was designed as a 2-week mission, and he said never go more than 3 orbits. At one point, I guess he had hung a lemon on one of the simulators to express his dissatisfaction with the quality in that spacecraft.
A family man and a veteran of several space flights, he was a national hero and was likely to be the first man to walk on the moon. But Grissom was also an outspoken critic of the space program and was quoted as saying, "Someone's going to get killed." Unfortunately, Grissom's worst fears were soon realized. On January 27, 1967, Grissom and his crew boarded the Apollo 1 capsule for a full-scale simulation. The problems began almost immediately. First, the capsule's communication systems failed.
You copy? No, I didn't read you, Chuck, at all. I can't read you, Chuck. You want to try the phone? Hey, how do I get to learn? We can't talk between three buildings. I can't hear a thing you're saying.
Suddenly, the capsule burst into flames with the astronauts sealed inside. Tragically, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee lost their lives before ever leaving the launch pad. Gus Grissom's family believes the Apollo 1 fire was no accident. They say NASA knows the truth. Were Gus Grissom and the Apollo 1 astronauts victims of a tragic accident? Or were they intentionally silenced because they knew too much? We may never know. The cause of the fire is still a mystery, and the capsule remains locked away at a military base. But Grissom wasn't the only Apollo critic to meet with a suspicious and untimely death. Thomas Ronald Barron was a safety inspector during Apollo 1's construction. After the fire, Barron testified before Congress that the Apollo program was in such disarray that the United States would never make it to the moon. He claimed his opinions made him a target.
Has there been any pressure on you by NASA?
Nothing. We were, my wife and I were somewhat harassed at home when this first thing broke some time back, but it's going away now.
As part of his testimony, Barron submitted a 500-page report detailing his findings. Then exactly 1 week after he testified, Barron's car was struck by a train. Barron, his wife, and stepdaughter were killed instantly.
First, we have the troposphere. This is where all of our weather occurs, and it is the lowest layer of the Earth's atmosphere. It starts at the Earth's surface and extends up to a height of 4 to 10 miles. Next, we have the stratosphere, which extends to about 35 miles above the Earth's surface. This is where our ozone layer resides and protects us from those dangerous UV rays. It is also the layer where aircraft travels, as it is free from weather disturbances. Now we go up to the mesosphere, where most meteors burn up on entry. The mesosphere stretches up to 50 miles above the Earth's surface. Next, we have the thermosphere, and this layer extends up to 400 miles from the Earth's surface, and the air here is very thin. Also, temperatures here start to get really hot, ranging anywhere from 200 to 500 degrees Celsius and 500 to 2000 degrees Celsius in the upper region. And last but not least is the exosphere. The temperature in the exosphere can vary from 0 to 1700 degrees Celsius. The exosphere is the outermost layer of the Earth's atmosphere and is around 6,200 miles from the Earth's surface. Now, according to NASA, low Earth orbit is around 1,200 miles from the Earth's surface. This here is the lunar module, now proudly displayed at the National Air and Space Museum. According to NASA, the primary materials used to build the module were aluminium alloy, stainless steel, nickel steel alloy, heat-resistant glass. Now, if this is the case, we have a very serious discrepancy here. Both the thermosphere and exosphere have temperatures ranging from 0 to 2000 degrees Celsius. First off, we have the aluminium alloy, which has a melting point of 463 degrees Celsius. Next, we have stainless steel, which has a melting point of 1510 degrees Celsius. Then we also have nickel steel alloy, which melts at 1453 degrees Celsius, and of course the heat resistant glass for the windows, which has a melting point of 760 degrees Celsius. So this would mean that the lunar module, along with its occupants, would have disintegrated well before it even passed through the thermosphere, let alone surviving the Van Allen radiation belt in the exosphere.
There's a magnetic force field surrounding the Earth and protecting it from harmful radiation from space. Deadly solar radiation streaming from the sun and cosmic rays coming from other stars are stopped dead in their tracks by this protective magnetosphere. But also bad news. This force field is a swirling donut-shaped field of deadly, deadly radiation. Any astronauts wanting to go to deep space will need to pass through this region and take an increased dose of radiation. I'm talking, of course, about the Earth's Van Allen belts. Now, the Van Allen belts are two donut-shaped regions of high-energy particles captured by the Earth's magnetosphere. They got their name thanks to their discoverer, James Van Allen. In fact, until the space age, we had no idea these regions existed. The first U.S. satellite, Explorer 1, was sent into orbit on January 31st, 1958, followed by Explorer 3 just 2 months later. They had a series of experiments on board, including micrometeorite and cosmic ray detectors. And their job was to find out what we might be getting ourselves into as we head outside the Earth's atmosphere.
Every space mission in history with humans on board has been well below this deadly radiation field. Mercury, Gemini, Soyuz, Skylab, the Space Shuttle all maintained altitudes well below 1,000 miles. All except Apollo. In 1998, the Space Shuttle flew to an altitude of 350 miles, one of its highest altitudes ever. Hundreds of miles below the beginning of a field of radiation that was so severe that the astronauts inside of their shielded spacecraft and inside of their shielded spacesuits saw flashes of light with their eyes shut that they described as shooting stars, due to radiation penetrating first the shuttle's shielding, then their spacesuit shielding, then their skulls, and finally the retinas of their closed eyes.
The most lethal forms of radiation, of course, are at the higher end of the spectrum. That's gamma rays and X-rays. We know what ultraviolet can do. If you stay out too long in the sun, you get sunburn and skin cancer and die, and it's all very sad. But gamma rays, and X-rays especially, are particularly lethal to humans, unprotected humans. There was no protection that I have been able to identify. I've found no reference to it. I found nothing that will tell me what level of protection is offered. So I have to assume none was. I've contacted the manufacturers of the spacesuits, and they said there was no radiation protection built into the spacesuits. Because I asked them if these same spacesuits could be used by technicians to go to Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island, because the nuclear reactors produce the same radiation as produced in space. They said no, not advisable, no protection.
And without having spacesuits nor spacecraft which can protect the occupants from radiation, NASA convinced the American people to pay $40 billion for the space program. But most of it was spent on the ground, not in space. Huge American corporations, many of which were manufacturing hardware for the military, made gigantic profits designing space vehicles and, more importantly, life-sized models of spaceships, and even huge stage sets resembling the lunar surface.
The moon is a unique body. There is no place on Earth that offers a topography quite like it. Certainly, the Earth has features similar to those on the lunar surface. But nowhere is the Earth cratered to the extent and in the same manner as the surface of the moon. The United States Geological Survey decided to build a model of one part of the lunar surface in an area accessible to present research centers. Examining a multitude of lunar photographs taken by the orbiter satellites, survey scientists choose proposed Apollo landing site 2P6 in the southwest part of Mare Tranquillitatis as a representative area and one that would be profitable to reproduce. Where to build it? Near Flagstaff, Arizona, are fields of volcanic cinders, the result of eruptions about the year 1065. The cinders provide an excellent material to recreate the lunar surface, and the geologic structure will offer training in mapping and sampling for astronauts. Craters on the lunar photos have been carefully examined, and their relative ages charted. All the craters are separated into 3 major age categories, from oldest to youngest. Of the 426 craters larger than 2 meters across that can be seen on the photos, 354 are among the oldest, 61 are of intermediate age, and 11 appear to have been formed recently. An area covering over 268,000 square meters is chosen and fenced off, and construction of the crater field begins. .426 holes await the emplacement of explosives. Finally, all the explosive charges are in place, and the holes have been covered over. Once more, the field is dragged back and forth until it is smooth again. Several months have gone by since this area was selected and fenced off. Hundreds of man-hours have gone into the calculations and careful preparation for firing. And now we are ready. Give us 354 old-age craters.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
Now we need 61 craters of intermediate age. As each set of craters has scattered debris over the surface, we have created an altogether new geologic area, with the oldest ejecta on the bottom and the newest on top. In some places, the original layers of cinder and clay have been completely turned over. We have changed a rolling cinder field into a crater field. But how closely does it match the topography of lunar site 2P6? This is the orbiter photograph of the lunar surface. And this is an aerial photograph of the new crater field. The size and location of each of the 426 craters have been reproduced with remarkable accuracy.
Obviously, if you're going to somewhere that nobody has been before, you need to have a simulator which recreates that environment as closely as you can. If you're going to the moon, you recreate the surface of the moon. And here we see a section of the lunar surface created. It's about 30 foot high, 30 foot long, 35 foot long. Scale is given by the two people standing in front of it. There were plenty of simulation exercises, but the point is, and this should be taken into account in virtually everything that is discussed with the Apollo program, 400,000 people may have worked on the program in total, but none of them had a need to know more than his own job required. The people who were making the rockets didn't know what the people who were making the spacesuits were doing, because they had no need to know about that. Their job was to make the best models and the best simulation of the lunar surface that they could.
storage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
Okay, we got a roll program.
Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading. Plus 30 seconds.
Roll is complete and the pitch is programmed. Houston, you are go for staging.
Plus, correction, 00572. Perigee, plus 00085. 00764. 030. 293. Down 86. Minus 00759er.
Apollo went into orbit around the moon. The journey that had taken the lifetime of mankind was nearing its crucial moment.
Oh, Apollo 11, Houston, we're wondering if you started into the limb yet, over. Okay, Charlie, we're in the limb. The docking index mark is the same. Roger, we copy. Houston, Apollo 11, Apollo 11 Eagle, over.
The lunar module Eagle was again given a thorough checkout to ensure the functioning of all systems, as Armstrong and Aldrin prepared to seal themselves off from Collins in the command module and for the two craft to pull apart.
2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Houston out, over. Eagle, Houston, we see you on the steerable, over. Roger, Eagle, done dock. Roger, how does it look?
The Eagle has wings.
Roger.
The Eagle has wings. On its own now, but with Columbia near at hand, it coasted around to the backside of the moon, and there, while out of direct communication with the Earth, it fired its engine to slow its descent to a touchdown on the near side of the moon. Collins in Columbia continued in orbit, awaiting their return.
.540 feet down at 15. 10 and 50 feet down at 4. Altitude, velocity, light. 3.5 down, 220 feet. 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down, 5.5 down. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. Okay, 75 feet. Guys looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on, forward. Forward. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed.
It is said that 500 million people gathered at TV sets around the world to wait for the first Earthling to set foot on the moon. Countless millions more listened on the radio to the voices from the moon.
This Neil, radio check. Neil, this is Houston, loud and clear. Break, Buzz, this is
Never before had so many people been attuned to one event at one time.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Neil, we can see you coming. Okay, I just checked. Getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up.
Roger, we copy.
It's a pretty good little jump. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The limb footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Oh, that looks beautiful from here, Neil. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here. There seems to be no difficulty in moving around as we suspected. It's even perhaps easier than the simulations of 16G that we performed in various simulations on the ground. Absolutely no trouble to walk around.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over.
That would be an honor.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you... For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with America in recognizing what an immense feat this is.
Alone, 45 miles above the moon's surface, Michael Collins completed an orbit every 2 hours. He listened to the progress of the moonwalk and awaited the moment when his companions on the surface would lift off to rendezvous with him.
Little pitch over.
I'm going right down US-1.
Roger.
When Armstrong and Aldrin, with their precious load of moon rocks, had transferred to Columbia, the faithful Eagle, its task completed, could be cut adrift.
Columbia, this is Houston, reading you loud and clear. Over.
Yeah, radio loud and clear. How's it going?
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. It really is.
Oh, gee, that's great.
Re-entry into the Earth's invisible atmosphere carries with it one of the most critical moments. Traveling nearly 25,000 miles per hour, the command module can miss the angle of re-entry by only several degrees and disintegrate into flames, or bounce off into space, never to return.
Apollo 11, Houston through Orion. Houston through Orion, standing by. Over. Strokes.
So at last the greatest adventure in history ended as it had begun, perfectly.
The first anti-contamination measures went quickly, and the astronauts were then hoisted aboard the helicopter from the carrier Hornet, where President Nixon watched in obvious excitement. He waited to personally welcome them after they'd entered the mobile quarantine facility, where they were to begin their 17-day isolation period.
And here they come. Here they come, the three astronauts, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, waving to the crowd of cheering sailors, moving swiftly into the mobile quarantine facility.
I have the honor to be President of the United States, but particularly because I have the privilege of speaking for so many and welcoming you back to Earth. That as a result of what you've done, we can do our job a little better. We can reach for the stars just as you have reached so far from the stars.
The fact that the Apollo program was so departmentalized, with various construction and test sites around the country, meant that only a few people saw the whole picture. And for the first time ever, there was no independent press coverage of such an historical event. Whatever pictures and sound were distributed to the public was strictly controlled and previewed by the federal government. It is clear from these rarely seen color television pictures that the crew of Apollo 11 brought a high-resolution color video camera with them on their mission. Yet the only pictures broadcast live from the moon's surface were these from a low-definition black and white camera. In fact, the networks complained because in addition to this, they were forced to shoot the images second generation off of a projection TV of the technology of 30 years ago, and were not even allowed to take a direct feed, which further degraded the quality and clarity of the images. Perhaps this was precisely what NASA and the federal government had in mind. After all, it was a first, regardless of where they were. Better to open up their debut mission with fuzzy pictures and numerous blackouts, rather than show too much revealing detail of a false scene that was yet unproven.
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade. We all here and the people listening in today had the opportunity to share that adventure over its developing and unfolding in the past months and years. It's our privilege today to share with you some of the details of that final month of July that was certainly the highlight for the three of us of that decade. We're going to divert a little bit from the format of past press conferences and talk about the things that interested us most, in particular the things that occurred on and about the moon. We will use a number of films and slides which most of you have already seen, and with the intent of pointing out some of the things that we observed on the spot which may not be obvious to those of you who are looking at them here from the surface of Earth.
What is going on in here? What was that thing? What did you do? What was the achievement, or what was the step you took, and how did you celebrate? Real enthusiasm. That's how you're really sharing the wins. That's how you're feeling the wins. That's how you're celebrating the wins. Take pride and joy in what you've accomplished and achieved. Share with enthusiasm.
It's our privilege today to share with you some of the details of that final month of July. That was certainly the highlight for the three of us of that decade.
NASA's highest-ranking official, James Webb, resigned without explanation just days before the first Apollo mission. Why, when he was on the threshold of achieving the greatest accomplishment of his career? All three Apollo 11 astronauts also resigned shortly after their return. On the 25th anniversary of the event, in 1994, Neil Armstrong made a rare public appearance and held back tears as he spoke these brief cryptic remarks before the next generation of taxpayers as they toured the White House.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
And what of the photographs? What do they tell us? On 3 separate occasions, our office asked NASA's Public Relations Department for every single picture of an astronaut on the surface of the Moon, just during the maiden voyage of Apollo 11. Many duplicates were sent. In all, fewer than 20 pictures were found, including first-hand investigation on site at the agency's vaulted archives. Quite surprising, considering the historical significance of the event. These very photographs are the same ones circulated year after year on anniversary commemorations. It is estimated that in just the first 60 minutes on the Moon, motivated by the tenuous nature of the circumstances, many more exposures could have been expediently taken. Also surprising is the scarcity of photographs of the mission's chief pioneer, Neil Armstrong. The greatest achievement in human history, and of the man whose first step echoed around the world, dawning a new age of scientific enlightenment, there is only one full-body picture of him on the Moon, besides this ghostly reflection. This one, taken by an automatic camera mounted on the side of the lunar module. Perhaps he feared liability should the whole conundrum later become unraveled. Perhaps he has forgotten that he attested to the authenticity of the event with his signature on this plaque engraved by the federal government. In fact, in the more than 30 years since the event, aside from NASA's initial press conference and the occasional brief anniversary remarks where few questions were permitted, he has never given one on-camera interview to anyone, ever. From an analytical standpoint, photographic anomalies have to be sought out with an understanding of lighting and shadows. The most straightforward is simple. When objects are lit solely by the sun, as all the scenes on the Moon were said to be, after all, lighting equipment was not only impractical, it was unnecessary in bright sunlight, then all shadows, regardless of the landscape, will run parallel with one another and never intersect, as shown by this example. In these seldom-seen photographs, obtained from a rarely used auxiliary NASA archival site, it is clear that these scenes were lit with artificial light. These shadows, which are cast at different angles, are evidence that a second light source is being used. In addition, the sun would not cause an isolated hotspot like this, only an artificial light would. Again, intersecting shadows and another hotspot. And again. And again. It is simply impossible for this picture to have been taken with sunlight on the moon. Here, the shadows are shown to be as black as pitch. And yet here, completely in a shadow, the astronaut is lit up like a Christmas tree. How can this be? Or this, on the shadow side of the lunar module. In this magnification of an Apollo photograph, a rock, very likely a papier-mâché prop because of the crease here, is categorized with the letter C. In later releases of the same picture, the letter is gone, probably airbrushed out. Here, a crosshair, which was burned directly into the image from the film plate, and thus should always appear on top of the objects in the photograph, appears behind the object in this scene, clearly revealing a composite of two pictures into one. Someone apparently forgot to create a burn crater underneath the lunar module's 10,000-pound thrust engine, despite the fact that during ground tests there was a real concern for the vehicle falling into the hole the engine created as it descended. Here is a depiction based on the latest specifications and scientific data. In these enlargements, it looks as though the lunar module was simply placed there. Not even one speck of moon dust on the landing pod. As a result, all subsequent flights had to have the same discrepancy, which was explained away by the effect of no atmosphere. And what about stars? On the moon, with no atmosphere, they must have been quite a sight to behold. Yet there is seldom any mention of them, if ever, by any of the astronauts on any of the missions. Undoubtedly, creating a mural with all the constellations properly placed in the sky would have been virtually impossible to create accurately, much less realistically. A competent amateur astronomer would have been able to call attention to the slightest error in measurement. The answer? Not to talk about the stars. Ever. In their post-flight press conference, it was the only question to which Neil Armstrong responded with an absence of memory.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Years later, though, Michael Collins would remember seeing the elusive stars and wrote about them in Expeditions to the Moon. It seems his memory improved the older he got.
It's absolutely unreal.
Although it appears that the astronauts are moving in the moon's gravity, which is 1/6 that of the Earth, Percy notes that when the speed of the film is doubled, the astronauts appear to be running as if in Earth's gravity. Also, when the footage of the lunar rover is doubled in speed, it looks as if it's driving here on Earth. But there's another reason some believe the Apollo missions were shot on Earth. If there is no air or wind on the moon, why is this American flag waving?
The fact that the flag flaps on the moon where there's no atmosphere means that there must have been a little blast of wind out in Area 51 where they shot this.
Could these questionable images simply be the result of astronauts struggling to plant the flag into the lunar surface? Or is there more going on than meets the eye? What about the still photography? Some say the design of the bulky spacesuits would have made it extremely difficult for the astronauts to operate their chest-mounted cameras. The man who designed these cameras is Jan Lundberg.
Once on the moon, on the lunar surface, in the dress, in the life support system, you couldn't see the camera. They couldn't bend their head that far down. They had no viewfinder, they had to aim by moving their body.
Click, click, click.
If the cameras were so difficult to manipulate, how were thousands of photos taken with crystal clarity and precise framing?
The pictures that we see that allegedly were taken on the moon are absolutely perfect.
On the moon, the astronauts' only source of light was the sun.
They had no extra lighting, no flashes or things like that.
And in this picture, the sun is directly behind the astronaut. His figure should be a silhouette. Yet even the smallest characteristics of his suit are recognizable.
It seems like he's standing in the spotlight. And I can't explain that. That escapes me. Why?
And finally, in this picture with the sun behind the lunar module, the front of the craft is clearly visible. The words United States are crisp and clear. These two photos seem to have the same mountain backdrop, yet the lunar module is only present in one of them. Seemingly impossible, since the LEM never moved and its base remained even after the mission.
What a ride, what a ride.
Hello, look what I have. I have the lunar lander, one of the lunar landers that landed on the moon. It's not something made for a school play by the art department or anything like this. So, we're going to make some observations. Observation number 1, no windows. So, there's no air pressure on the moon, so they can't use a barometric altimeter. So, how do they know how far they are from the surface of the moon? Don't know. Maybe this is why they didn't have to use the jet here in the bottom. You see how there is no crater or anything. No, it's because the gravity is only 1/6, so it could just fall gently. So, okay, so it falls gently. Now, let's have a closer look. Let's do this. And let's see. And let's look closer. Look, you see here at the top, they started with very good intentions. They said, we are going to make this look very neat and everything will be very great, okay? And they have these bendy over things that they put a nail through. And then they just ran out. They ran out of them. So they just use a press-on stud. And here is a very important bendy thing. They had another one, so they use it here. And some more press-on stud. You can see by this shape here, the highlight here, you see, and a little bit of highlight here, compared to the low light here, and the highlight here. You can tell that this is a thin material. And look at this buckling. Whoa, it's a like big S shape. So, and this here, somebody put this for a joke, so that stupid people will think, oh, this must be very important, it must be some sensor. So this not look like very much like precision engineering. Look at this, it's a bit too big. And look, not even a straight line. So look here, again, a bit of mistake. But this looked like it was designed by somebody who is kind of good with a ruler, but not very good with aesthetics, or not very good with dynamics, and not very good with fluid line. Let's look at these here. See, one here, another one here, another one here. These multi-directional jets. Okay. Here there is a guard, because the jet is going to come out very hot and it's gonna here. And there is another guard, because the jet is gonna come very hot and go here, very hot. And here, oh, there is no guard, but it's going to come here, just like this one, no? You see these things here, the padding here, with the press studs? This looks like a BMX guard for the crossbar, but it's too thick, it's not for a real BMX. But look, here, press stud. Okay, and here, press stud. But here, tape. And here, not even tape. Okay? And people will say, you stupid, this is for heat resistance. It's like, okay, if this is for heat resistance, why they use cardboard here? This doesn't look like very heat resistance. And look here, this little pointy thing. If you look close, it looks like it's a peephole. It looks like somebody inside looking. And it doesn't matter about this big gap here or all the crimping, and it doesn't matter about all this. Look, all this precision engineering. I would like engineers to look at this and to write to me and tell me that this really is the result of precision engineering, especially the way that this overhang. Okay? Look at these lines. Okay? Look, I'm looking to see if there's a lemon hanging from the top, like Grissom, but no lemon. Look at this crimping. Okay? Now, let's look here. Look. Silver foil with copper tape. Look, here is closer. It must be very important that these three are closer. Okay? Dun, 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 all the way up. Let's look at the other one. Oh, it's not so important. There's not three here. Look. Three here together. Not three here together. So it's not so important. Oh, and look here. They must have finished the tape. They started with the other one, and here they finished. They just didn't have enough, so they could only do the half. Okay? But look, you see how they didn't know to put a pin there so that this doesn't buckle? You see how they didn't know to maybe move this in a little bit so it doesn't overhang? What is this? Look, it's just like, it's got buttons and things. Must be mega important. Never mind the laws of experimental physics and electronics that says the whole thing would have been electrified whilst it went through the Van Allen radiation belt. Ignore that, it doesn't matter.
So this is a high-res picture on the Apollo archives, and it's titled Close-Up of LM, and the ID number on that picture is AS11-40-5922.
You might think this was done for a school play, you know, but no, sadly no, this was not done for a school play. This was done by NASA for the American government and for you.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
It was all recorded on these telemetry tapes. So where is this hard evidence?
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
Could this be true? Mankind's first interplanetary exploration and the original science data is missing?
11, this is Houston, radio check, over.
If it's anywhere, it should be here at NASA's Goddard Space Center in Maryland, home to the National Space Science Data Archives.
This film you're making now, what is it? Does it have a name? I mean, have you have a name for it yet, or
you're calling it Did We Go?
Did We Go? Okay. Okay.
Doesn't have it either. The Smithsonian doesn't have it. Johnson doesn't have it.
Right. We've been unable to track it down. I mean, we don't know where this telemetry data ended up, and we don't know what path it may have taken. So, unfortunately, I'm afraid I can't really give you much of a clue as to where this data ended up and whether it still exists.
My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. Orion is NASA's next-generation spacecraft. Built with versatility in mind, it can take astronauts deeper into space than we've ever gone before. Before we can send astronauts into space on Orion, we have to test all of its systems. And there's only one way to know if we got it right: fly it in space. For Orion's first flight, no astronauts will be aboard. The spacecraft is loaded with sensors to record and measure all aspects of the flight in every detail. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. For this flight, it's time to head home.
The plan that NASA has is to build a rocket called SLS, which is a heavy lift rocket. It's something that is much bigger than what we have today, and it will be able to launch the Orion capsule with humans on board, as well as landers or other components to destinations beyond Earth orbit. Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
Once we travel beyond low Earth orbit, the crew will be exposed to larger amounts of radiation. So we have to design both the crew protection systems and our electronic systems to withstand this radiation.
So that would mean that Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin were a tough bunch of SOBs able to withstand all that brutal radiation, considering these challenges are still yet to be solved. To protect the astronauts from the Van Allen radiation belts, the lunar module would have required 6 feet of lead shielding. But here's what they really had for protection.
Obviously, the only shielding they had was the literally paper-thin outer hull of aluminum, and their suits consisting of glass fiber, some aluminum fibers, and silicon rubber.
It's very interesting concerning radiation that the astronauts were protected by a thin film of aluminum, when here on Earth they put a lead shield on us when they take a dental x-ray.
An inflatable plastic balloon satellite, 100 feet in diameter, tall as a 10-story building, will be sent aloft folded accordion fashion inside a 26.5-inch magnesium container. The latter is mounted in the nose of a 3-stage 92-foot Thor Delta rocket. Highlighting one of the nation's proudest days in space, the satellite, called Echo 1, will serve as a reflector for radio waves that bounce back to Earth, paving the way for a new kind of worldwide communications. The rocket at Cape Canaveral carries the balloon and 30 pounds of powder, which will turn to gas and inflate it at a height above 1,000 miles. Inflated at a height above 1,000 miles. And inflated at a height above 1,000 miles. A pre-dawn blastoff at Cape Canaveral fires a Thor rocket with a sensational payload, a balloon as big as a 13-story building. This canister released from the rocket carries within it an Echo balloon satellite, like the one that will reflect signals from space back to Earth when put into orbit next fall. Remarkable cameras carried aloft by the Thor record the brief life of the largest satellite yet, as it goes 922 miles into space. The experiment is a complete success.
This is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. I certainly plan on being around to see that.
Astronauts to the moon.
But it's evidence the astronauts left behind, and not what they brought back, that may offer the clinching proof. Each successful moon mission set up a range of experiments. More than 30 years after Apollo 11, one of them continues to operate, the Lunar Laser Ranger.
There were two major experiments. One was a series of corner reflectors to reflect laser beams from the Earth sent to the moon that then, because of the geometry of these corner reflectors, would send the beam back in exactly the direction that it came from.
High up in the Davis Mountain Range, the McDonald Observatory in Texas continues to gather information from the experiment.
In 33 years, no one has showed up. No one has come and talked to us.
Jerry Wyatt would welcome a visit from the conspiracy theorists. Since 1969, his team has been firing a laser beam at the experiment an average of 240 times a year.
And of course, at Apollo 11 site is where the United States placed its first lunar retro package. So we fire laser at this spot and three others on the moon. Now he's turned the laser on. In a few seconds, you'll see the splash.
The laser hits the reflector on the moon's surface and bounces back as a series of pulses invisible to the human eye. By measuring the time it takes for each laser pulse to return, scientists gather key information about the Earth's position in the solar system.
That's not light coming from the moon. The splash you see is light coming from the end of our own telescope. That's the first spot where a man walked on the moon.
Our search for the truth has revealed the definitive answer. Maybe that's why conspiracy theorists have so little to say on this subject.
In addition to the high-resolution camera used to take these pictures, LRO also carries an instrument known as Lunar Orbiter Laser Altimeter, or LOLA. Basically, it fires a laser repeatedly which bounces off the lunar surface and back at LRO, thus allowing the satellite to make a 3D topographic map by measuring the time it takes for the laser pulses to return. Hold on a second. I thought you needed a retroreflector to do that.
The December 1966 issue of National Geographic explains why no such reflectors are needed to bounce signals off the moon. This is detailed in The Laser's Bright Magic by Thomas Malloy. On page 876, he states, 4 years ago, a ruby laser, considerably smaller than those now available, shot a series of pulses at the moon, 240,000 miles away. The beams illuminated a spot less than 2 miles in diameter, and were reflected back to Earth with enough strength to be measured by ultra-sensitive electronic equipment. It should also be noted that many types of signals can be bounced off the moon, even without such reflectors. In the 1950s, moon bounce was used to communicate around the curvature of the Earth. That is, if you were in the military and wanted to talk to someone in Hawaii from California, you would bounce your conversation off of the moon.
We also established that the Soviet Union also managed to bounce lasers off the moon and back to Earth, without a retroreflector. This is documented in the November 5th, 1963 printing of the New York Times. A concentrated beam of light has been bounced off the moon and detected on Earth by a Soviet observatory in Crimea. The feat, reported today by TASS, the Soviet press agency, duplicates an experiment conducted late last year by engineers of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The super-intensive beam was produced by a laser, a device that amplifies and focuses light. The principle is believed to have potential use in space communications and long-distance energy transmission. The Soviet announcement said that a laser had been installed at the focal point of the 100-inch reflector telescope at the Crimean Astrophysical Observatory. Once again, far from proving NASA's past moon missions were real, LRO has effectively shot NASA in the foot, this time by discrediting what is considered by many to be one of the strongest pieces of evidence that men went to the moon. The LRO's laser instrument, in addition to the experiments conducted by MIT and the Crimean Astrophysical Observatory, long predating Apollo 11, prove that you don't need a reflector to bounce lasers off the moon.
In terms of the global economy, is that prevailing across your industry gathering there?
Yeah, without question, it's great to be here in Berlin at IHIF and ITB, and you're really seeing that confidence that you heard so clearly at Davos. Head over into the hotel.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone which you have done. And one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peace of all nations, and with interest and a curiosity and with a vision for the future.
And you know what's so great now about YouTube and about these video platforms is, you know, back in the day, you got one shot to see this stuff on television, and that was it. I mean, you believed it was true. You saw it once. Maybe you saw it on a rerun. Maybe on the other news channel they would rerun some of this footage. But now it's all been released, and people have the ability to look at it and to pick it apart and to really think about it. You know, like we talked earlier about the lunar landing. Now that people have the technology at their fingertips on their laptops to be able to speed up the lunar landing footage. You know, you have the land rover going around and you have the guys hopping around in slow motion. Speed that up 200% and it looks like they went out in the desert and filmed that. But here's something that I'm going to tell you as a video guy. There is no way you can have a power source that strong at that time in history, and there's no way you could transmit that video signal all the way to Earth. Absolutely 100% not. Let me tell you something. I have just on my, if I have a handheld video camera and I want, and let's say I'm shooting a scene and the producer wants to see what I'm shooting. So they have a transmitter in their hand and they have a battery on my camera. The battery that I have is about the size of a brick. It's more square, but it's about the same mass as a brick. And it only lasts for maybe an hour and a half. And that signal only goes a couple hundred feet. Now you're going to tell me that on that teeny little spaceship, with that teeny little camera, they're going to have enough power to transmit a full color video signal all the way down to Earth.
The impossibility of it goes beyond silly, right? I mean, there's just no way that we can make these types of broadcasts. And common sense tells you that here on good old plain Earth, because if we have 50,000 watts and a relatively high gain antenna for AM radio station KOA, and we can barely cover the state, all right? Now we're starting to put things in perspective.
We're going to look at WABC out of New York City, which has its antenna on top of the Empire State Building, so there's absolutely nothing in the way, no terrain, no other buildings. It's the highest building there. Let's look at WABC, and we're going to look at analog, because analog is what they used in the 60s and 70s, and I already know what somebody's going to say. Yeah, they had technology ahead of ours. They went digital. Well, digital requires much more power than analog. So I'm giving NASA every benefit of the doubt here. The transmitter uses 34 kilowatts of power. Now, how far can this be seen when you had analog television? How far could you see it? Maybe 40, 50 miles. At 50 miles, you were definitely getting a lot of snow and a lot of mess up. Maybe if atmospheric conditions were perfect, maybe 60 miles, but it would still be a very snowy picture. And I'm giving benefit of the doubt, saying it was a Channel 13, best technology back then, with the strongest power, which, by the way, wasn't 34 kilowatts. It wasn't allowed to have that much back then. But now it is 34 kilowatts of power. Will transmit 50 miles. VHF, these are the channels I was just talking about, 2 to 13. These are the most efficient. There's no more efficient transmission of television in the skies. There just isn't. Everything else uses more power. Everything else. This is why VHF was picked for the main channels in the United States. It's because it was the most efficient. If you happen to live somewhere where they have an analog signal, this is the lowest figure I can figure, 3 kilowatts. This is roughly equivalent to what they used on the moon. If they used every stinking ounce of power on the moon, then they beat it by 1 kilowatt. 3 kilowatts goes 50 miles, and 3 kilowatts on the moon goes how far? Well, it's actually 4. So let's give it 1/4 more. Actually, let's give it double. Let's give it double. 6 kilowatts. So it goes 100 miles. And if they used 100% of the power, they're not keeping air conditioning or heating going on in the lunar module. The computer's not working. The oxygen inside isn't going. It's not keeping the inside pressurized, and all that kind of stuff. Light systems. Again, no loss of power because of going through inverters and different wires and different things like that, which cracks me up. There's a picture which showing the camera outside in supposedly 251 degrees Celsius temperature in the sun, and it's got the regular plastic coating on the wires going to it. It's just absolutely insane. We are told that only 4 kilowatts, if they use the entire max, risking being able to take off, they were able to transmit 232,000 miles.
You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself. Away from me. You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
Buzz Aldrin's violent reaction is not surprising, considering the hundreds of thousands of dollars he has made by defrauding people, selling his personal memorabilia. According to the winter 2008 issue of Heritage magazine, in September of 2007, Aldrin sold the following items which he claimed were flown to the moon. A medallion for $15,535, a silver dollar for $31,070, a chart for $71,700, and a handwritten note for $179,250. Not all of the Apollo astronauts profiteer off this lie, but Aldrin is certainly the worst offender.
Mr. Armstrong, Bart Sibrel, ABC Digital. Wanted to give you the opportunity to swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon. Will you put your left hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Gentlemen. Mr. Sibrel.
Yes? If you really walked on the moon, why would you not do that? So why don't you just put the into the record in the argument and put your hand on the Bible, swear to God you walked on the moon.
Mr. Sibrel, knowing you, that's probably a fake Bible.
Really? Well, no, it's a real Bible. You have the opportunity to have $5,000.
The meeting is not open.
Well, you have $5,000 cash. You can give it to charity if you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon.
Please
I have
give
the
it to
tape.
charity. It'd be fine.
Why don't you swear to? Why not? Why won't you do it? So why don't you put your hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Mr. Sibrel has made a fool of himself in front of the world. Mr. Sibrel, you do not deserve answers.
You want me to knock you in the head?
Well, I want you to swear to God on the Bible that you walked on the moon.
Okay.
If you walked on the moon, we're given the opportunity to swear to God that you walked on the moon.
I'm going to give you the opportunity to get the hell knocked out of you if you don't leave me alone.
Well, you're talking to the wrong guy. Why don't you talk to the administrator in NASA? We're passengers. We're guys going on a flight.
I don't hit people, but you're going to be on the deck unless you get
I'm heading out. I appreciate it.
And get the hell out of the house.
Well, take your stuff and get the fuck out.
Why don't you quote me and say it's bullshit?
And the shadows in the wrong place. I don't give a damn about all that shit.
You're full of shit.
Of lunar orbit being falsified.
Being falsified?
Correct. We got an unedited tape from a source at the Johnson Space Center.
Yes. Totally nonsense.
I think when you see the footage, you'll see that it's
Well,
very extraordinary, one of a kind,
Okay.
behind the scenes type
Yeah.
of footage.
Yeah. Well, if it is, why do you have access to something that no one else has seen before?
Serendipity, I guess. And it was recorded on the 18th
of what?
Of July, 1969. Do you remember this?
On the 18th?
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light. We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera. South America becomes invisible just off beyond the terminator or inside the shadow. We can see the oceans with a definite blue cast, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth.
Roger, the ATC is working real well. The F-22 looks good. Over. Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, did you copy? Over.
Roger, we copied that, Charlie.
Roger, your transmissions the last couple of times have been about 2 by. Over.
Okay, how do you read me now?
Right, you're 5 by now. Now we're coming in. Can't quite make out who that is.
What is your proposition? That we didn't go to the moon?
I know for a fact that you did. I know for a fact that you did not.
You know for a fact that we did not.
That's correct, and you'll see this tape proves that.
Okay, well, I'm not interested in satisfying your suppositions when there's all this evidence that we did.
This proves, as you see, that you were using the window to demonstrate that you were halfway to the moon when you were
Turn the camera off, please. Turn the camera off.
What is your favorite thing about space?
Going there. Because not many people have been there. It's nice to do something that other people haven't done. But you don't want to do dangerous things. You want to do successful things. And if it's new and different, there may be some things where something could go wrong. So you want to be prepared.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened.
If you show this publicly, you're open for a lawsuit. Okay?
Right at the beginning of the space race, The Soviet rocket genius Sergei Korolev had built the USSR what was at the time the most powerful rocket the world had ever seen, the R-7 Semyorka. Capable of lifting a thick-walled spacecraft with a sea-level internal pressure, it set the Soviet Union the milestones of the first satellite, the first human in space, the first unmanned lunar flybys, and today it is still used to launch the Soyuz. In the mid-60s, Russia went on to design what became conceived as the supersized ICBM, the Proton rocket, which was used to send the unmanned Zonda probes around the moon and back.
So when Kennedy made his now famous "We choose to go to the moon" speech in 1962 to rally public support, the Soviet leader Khrushchev's response was silence, neither confirming nor denying that they had a plan for manned moon missions. But at the time, Khrushchev wasn't really interested in competing with the US over the moon. He was more interested in ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles for the strategic rocket forces of the Soviet Union. But there were others in the Soviet Union that had harboured plans for a manned moon mission for a long time. These included the man whose name was a state secret and the most powerful man outside of the Kremlin when it came to space. He was Sergei Pavlovich Korolev. Outside the inner circle of the top space scientists, he was known only as the chief designer, or by his first two initials SP, because the Soviet leadership feared that the Western powers would send agents to try and assassinate him. Korolev was the man who was behind many of the Soviet space successes and the head of the OKB-1 design bureau. He oversaw Sputnik and the manned missions, including the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. His authority extended over almost everything to do with space. His design group worked on missions to Mars and Venus, communications, spy and weather satellites, ICBMs, and the Soviet manned moon missions. Korolev had a huge amount of control over the space program. In administrative power, he was almost a one-man version of NASA, covering areas that in the US were done across multiple aerospace companies and flight centers. But even a man of his power and connections didn't get everything his own way. He had to continuously fight against rival designers and design groups. Although Korolev wanted the moon missions himself, in 1960 the job was given to his rival, Vladimir Chelomey, because of his patronage by Khrushchev, but his lack of experience meant that the missions progressed slowly. The progress of Apollo, on the other hand, worried the chief designers, and as a result of this and the infighting between the design bureaus meant that there were multiple overlapping designs for the moon missions. At one point, there were 30 different designs for launchers and spacecraft. In 1964, the Soviet leader Khrushchev was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. Korolev was given then complete control over the moon missions and pushed through his designs ahead of Chelomey's, and the decision finally to compete for the moon was given, with the aim to land in 1967, the 50th anniversary of the October Revolution, and to get there before the Americans. This, however, created a problem for Korolev. In order to lift a payload weight of 95 tons, he needed a very large rocket. This new rocket would be called the N-1, be as big as the American Saturn V, and would require new, large, powerful engines, similar to the F-1 rocket engines used in the Saturn. Valentin Glushko was the leading rocket designer at the time and the head of the OKB 456 Bureau, which had a near monopoly when it came to rocket design and production. He specialized in making engines that used hypergolic propellants. These consist of a fuel and an oxidizer that, when mixed together, spontaneously ignite when they come into contact with each other. Korolev thought these were too dangerous for manned missions due to the highly toxic and corrosive nature of the chemicals used to make up the fuel. Glushko said that it was not possible to create a new large engine design that used cryogenic fuel of liquid oxygen and kerosene and get it ready in time with limited resources and cash. He also cited that at the time the Americans had been working on cryogenic engines for the Saturn for 5 years and still hadn't got them to work reliably. There was also a personal problem between the two men. Korolev blamed Glushko for denouncing him in the Great Purge under Stalin in 1938, leading to Korolev's near death, serving 6 years in a Soviet labour camp. Glushko, on the other hand, considered Korolev to be irresponsibly cavalier and autocratic towards things which were outside of his zone of competence. This clash between them led to Glushko refusing to work for Korolev and caused delays to the overall program. Korolev was forced to find a new engine designer and gave the job to Nikolai Kuznetsov, who was a leading jet engine designer but had not designed a rocket engine before. The Kuznetsov Design Bureau looked at the problem and realised that creating a rocket engine was not that different to the jet engines they were used to. But they ran into the same problem as Glushko, in that the Soviets simply didn't have the industrial infrastructure that the Americans did to produce a new large engine. The solution they came up with was innovative, but would have both negative and positive outcomes. Where the Americans used 5 large engines for the initial booster stage of the Saturn, Korolev was forced to use 30 small but highly efficient engines arranged in a ring of 24 around the base and 6 at the centre. In order to achieve the thrust required, the design of these engines was very advanced and used a method called the closed cycle system. This was capable of boosting the efficiency and power to levels which were believed impossible before. The Americans had known about the closed cycle system, but thought it was too difficult and dangerous, as the high pressure, high temperature oxygen method could cause the engines to burn up. So they used the more reliable but less efficient open cycle system, but with much larger engines. It had only been possible for the Soviets to create a closed cycle engine because they had secretly developed advanced stainless steel alloys, something which the Americans didn't know about at the time. Using so many smaller engines allowed the N-1 rocket to create more power than the Saturn, but the likelihood of one or more of them failing and making the rocket unstable was much greater. One of the main problems was the complex fuel plumbing that was required to supply all the engines, which in time proved to be a very fragile system. But just as the Soviets were working on the new engines, in 1966 Korolev died after undergoing a routine operation. This was a setback because Korolev had a unique set of abilities and connections and was the major driving force behind making sure that the moon missions would be delivered. The work of continuing fell to Vasily Mishkin, Korolev's deputy, but Mishkin didn't have the political astuteness or power of his old boss. The Soviets also didn't have the facilities to test all 30 of the engines of the main stage at once before they were mounted to the rocket. The Soviets planned 14 launches. The first 12 would be unmanned, and the last 2 would be the manned lunar missions.
In November 1968, a group of cosmonauts led by Alexei Leonov submitted a proposal to the Politburo, requesting the December 7th circumlunar flight of Zonda 7 to be manned.
We, cosmonauts of the Soviet Union, respectfully ask the Politburo to consider ordering the next circumlunar mission to be manned. We are ready to take the risk, whatever it may bring, to serve the motherland. This is our duty.
This scheduled launch was just weeks before the historic Apollo 8 flight. Their proposal was rejected. In 1999, Sir Bernard Lavelle had this to say to the BBC.
I had frequently asked my Soviet contacts when they intended to send a human being to the moon. And their response was always, when we can be absolutely certain of getting him back alive. And they did not believe that the Americans would do this.
The Soviets had actually made huge progress, and the design by trial and error was believed to have ironed out all of the problems. But by the time of the 5th launch in August 1974, the whole moon mission was cancelled by Brezhnev. But there is a strange twist to the end of this story. The NK-43 rockets that had been developed for the N1 were, by the end, much more reliable and the most efficient and powerful rocket engines for their size ever made. 20 years after they were meant to have been destroyed on order of the Kremlin, 60 of them were rediscovered and sold to the Americans for $1.1 million each. A subsequent new, larger model, the RD-180, based on the technology of the NK-43, is now built by the Russians and used by the Americans for their Atlas V heavy launch vehicle.
Having seen hundreds of rocket firings when I was employed by Rocketdyne, I know that the jet of the lunar module lander, the lunar lander, would have created an enormous crater. It would have scoured the moon's surface. It would have tossed up rocks, sand, everything, and created a crater maybe so large that the entire lunar lander could have sunk into it. After all, we're dealing with a 10,000-pound thrust engine, which is pointed directly at the surface, lowered into the surface, and yet, if you look at pictures of the lunar lander on the moon, there is no disturbance whatsoever under the lunar lander's rocket.
And no dust deposited in the pads, the cup-shaped pads at the bottom.
That's another good point. Dust would have been blown 6 ways from Sunday and would have landed everywhere.
And then the famous scene, which has been played over and over, where they are landing there, but they're setting down, and you're hearing the astronaut talking through it.
Oh, that's a good point. I let's say, became aware of that only recently, that here's Neil Armstrong talking about landing on the moon with a microphone, and yet he's sitting practically on top of a rocket engine that is putting out sound levels of about 140 or 150 decibels. Now, we know that that is absolutely impossible to overcome that sound level inside the lunar lander with a normal human voice.
Eagle, we got you now. It's looking good, over. Roger, copy.
The Apollo samples are not rocks gathered during moonwalks. They are, in fact, meteorites that were specifically gathered on Earth by von Braun himself before the moon landing ever took place. After Kennedy declared we would land on the moon by the end of the decade, the race to the moon was in full force. So why would von Braun, who was supposed to be working feverishly on the Saturn V rocket, need to go to Antarctica? In the May 1967 Popular Science article entitled A Spaceman's Look at Antarctica, page 114 to 116, von Braun states, "It may well be smart to test lunar vehicles or surface drills in Antarctica before taking them to the moon." This was never done. He did, however, meet up with the Penguins. In reality, the real reason for the trip was to gather meteorites that could be passed off as moon rocks. Some meteorites that actually originated from the moon can be found on Earth, as they can be expelled from the moon during meteor crashes. After von Braun found them, the outer surfaces were probably blasted with an abrasive in a ceramics lab to hide the fact that they had fallen through the Earth's atmosphere. After the conclusion of the Apollo missions, some Apollo astronauts made money by taking tourists down to Antarctica to gather meteorites. Due to the contrast with the landscape, meteorites are easier to spot there.
Area 51 is one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the United States. If you went in and tried to get some information, you could be shot and killed without any warning.
Russian spy satellite photos of Area 51 reveal not only a series of hangars that resemble movie sound stages, but also barren moon-like areas which coincidentally are covered with craters. Compare this photo of a lunar crater allegedly taken from the moon's orbit by Apollo 10 with this satellite photo of a crater at Area 51. Even astronauts acknowledge the similarity of the terrain.
It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States.
Could billions of people really have been fooled into thinking the Nevada desert was the moon? Casing believes it's possible, and maybe the real reason Area 51 is so heavily guarded.
This is a very secret base, and with good reason, because undoubtedly the moon sets are still there.
And if they are, no one's getting a look at them anytime soon.
The Smithsonian Museum in the US is using a crowdfunding website to try to raise money for the restoration of Neil Armstrong's spacesuit. The suit, which was worn by the astronaut as he took his first steps on the moon, needs almost $700,000 to be raised to ensure it stands the test of time.
This is the suit that enabled humankind to explore another world for the first time.
So the museum already has raised over $170,000 on the website Kickstarter. They need a bit more, and they've got until August 19.
Noticed anything? No? No, not the hard-to-believe fact that it's hard for a suit designed to stand the test of space with radiation, vacuum, very hot in the light, very cold in the shade, and so on and so on. But it's not able to stand the test of time in a nicely climated museum, although there are original clothings from Henry VIII, nearly 600 years old. And it's not that they mean to need $700,000 to clean the suite a little bit up and put some moth powder on. And so, did you notice the boots? Especially the profile cuttings. This is the legendary boot profile known from almost every school textbook, seen on TV and papers a million times as the famous first footprint of a man in the moon dust. Well, I don't see any similarity. Flat with a circle in the middle here, big bars there. Well, in a courtyard case it would be pleaded not guilty, these boots have not been on the crime scene. And look at it closely. Don't they look merely as if the astronauts' wives had made some very fancy spaceman costumes with lots of knuckles everywhere, probably taken from camping bottles or so, and then when it came to the bottom they just go asking 6'10" Uncle Steve if they could have his old sneakers and glued them there?
Many levels to this film. This is like three-dimensional chess, and he's trying to tell us several stories that appear to be separate but actually are not. And he's doing this both through the overt script that he wrote. He's telling it through tricks of the trade, the subliminal imagery, and these constant retakes giving him odd angles and things. And he's also telling you through the changes that he made to the Stephen King novel. So if you watch those three things, you begin to understand this deeper story. And this deeper story has its birth, I guess, in the idea that Stanley Kubrick was involved with faking the Apollo moon landings. And I've had Hollywood special effects people from the 60s and 70s who were front screen projection experts tell me that I absolutely have nailed the Apollo footage as being the result of front screen projection. Just go to any Apollo site and look, and you'll see that they have to hide the bottom of the screen, and you can always see the set screen separation line in every Apollo footage, every Apollo image, and the video footage that has a background. Once I nailed the front screen projection process inside the Apollo footage, then I became interested in seeing if Kubrick left any clues in the rest of his career to his possible involvement in faking the Apollo moon footage, and I realized that all of the things that one could imagine that Stanley Kubrick would have had to go through to fake the Apollo moon footage. And there in the movie, every time that Stanley deviated from the Stephen King novel, he deviated into those exact questions. You know, what was it like to make a deal with the U.S. government? What was it like to lie to your wife and tell her that you were doing one thing when you were doing another? What was it like when your wife found out what you were really doing?
Ever thought about my responsibilities?
Oh, Dick, what are you talking about?
Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers? Has it ever occurred to you that I have agreed to look after the Overlook Hotel until May the 1st? Does it matter to you at all that the owners have placed their complete confidence and trust in me, and that I have signed a letter of agreement, a contract, in which I have accepted that responsibility? Do you have the slightest idea what a moral and ethical principle is? Do you? Has it ever occurred to you what would happen to my future if I were to fail to live up to my responsibilities?
The most obvious allusion to the moon landings is in this scene, where young Danny Torrance is playing in the Overlook Hotel. He is wearing an Apollo 11 sweater, and as he stands up, it is like the rocket is taking off. This is probably a deliberate visual gag on Kubrick's part, given the specially designed carpet of the hotel has a geometric pattern similar to Apollo 11's launch pad. With this in mind, Jay Weidner argues there are many more references to NASA's lunar program littered throughout the film. The food supplies in the hotel include Tang, a powdered fruit drink used by NASA on its manned spaceflights. More subtly, the number 11 and the letter A are hidden in shapes throughout the sets. And the Native Americans on the tapestry to the left look suspiciously like Saturn V rockets, the same ones used on the Apollo program. The film begins with the main characters, Jack, Wendy, and Danny Torrance driving along the Going to the Sun road in the Rocky Mountains. The classical god of the sun is Apollo. Later, when Jack Torrance meets the manager of the hotel, we can see two eagles in the office. Also, Jack's typewriter is a German Adler, or eagle, machine. The symbol of the Apollo missions was the American bald eagle, and the lunar module itself was named the Eagle. Meanwhile, the manager's outfit, comprising of red, white, and blue clothing, means he represents the government. Jack Torrance, on the other hand, is an author, an independent artist looking for a job to support him and his family while he works on his next project. In other words, Jack represents Stanley Kubrick, and the manager represents the government hiring him to work on the Apollo program. The pressure of the huge task gets to him and puts a strain on his marriage. Jack's rant is therefore really Kubrick's feelings about the dark hoax he was forced to perpetrate. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and the nature of the work is hinted at in the typeface, A11 for Apollo 11. It is important to note that The Shining is adapted from the novel of the same name by Stephen King, but none of the allusions to the Apollo program were in the book. They were added by Kubrick as part of his changes to the source material. These changes included altering the book's Room 217 to Room 237. Jay Weidner says Kubrick changed the number to draw attention to the moon landings. The average distance of the moon from the Earth is 237,000 miles. 237 is also, according to Weidner, the name of the studio where Kubrick filmed the fake NASA mission.
The pride of a nation was at stake, and the goal of a martyr, not to mention the growing unrest domestically of a government throwing tens of thousands of lives away in a foreign war riddled with contradiction and ambiguity. In addition, the Apollo program had already spent billions of dollars. If it failed to achieve its goal with such an investment, it would indeed be a large and bitter pill for the taxpayers to swallow. The cost of the program, whose sole goal was to be the first to plant a flag on the lifeless rock just outside the Earth, if adjusted for inflation to the 21st century, was $135 billion. With a profit margin of just 7%, this would be equal to over $9 billion profit going to the privileged contractors chosen by their friends at NASA. Yet how could such an undertaking be kept secret, and for such a long time? To the latter, one needs only to remember that an unsolved riddle 6 years older, the assassination of President Kennedy, still daunts the minds of the vast majority of Americans. As a parent of a conspiracy, as his assassin being assassinated himself, the truth of the matter has still escaped history. In keeping a secret of the magnitude of the Apollo missions being fraudulently created, one turns to the Manhattan Project for comparison. Surreptitiously building the first nuclear bomb during the early to mid-1940s involved 129,500 people over a 3-year period. Yet the secret did not get out. A quarter century later, the art and technology of espionage inevitably improved, narrowing dramatically the number of players in the know of a large clandestine operation. Competition for victor was unparalleled. Powerful nations spent billions in unabashed rivalry to outdo the other. The Soviet Union launched the first orbiting satellite, the first animal, the first man. They had logged 500% more hours in space than the United States. And in June of 1969, they launched an unmanned probe to the moon to retrieve the first soil sample from another world, just 1 month before Apollo 11. That's how close the race was. Had their unmanned probe not crash-landed into the lunar surface, the first moon rock brought back to Earth would have been by the Soviet Union. Richard Nixon, president at the time, had this to say about the latest work of the human hand. It is the greatest week since creation, the greatest event since the laying of the foundation of the seas, since the origin of the universe itself, since the design and formation of the delicate human eye through which all these things are perceived, was a flying machine with its 2 passengers landing on its closest celestial neighbor and returning from where it came. Perhaps again, God's irony lies somewhere within this great boast of humankind. The building of the tallest tower for the sole purpose of standing out among the races was never finished. The machine that was so great that it was said to be untouchable by even God never completed its first voyage. And finally, the crowning achievement of humankind, the greatest boast of the species, the event in human history most associated with pride in our own accomplishments, landing on the moon. 20 years later, and years behind schedule, the same space program couldn't put into Earth orbit a telescope with a lens that focused. And yet 2 decades earlier, a mission 100 times more complicated worked on its first occasion.
Trip in my rocket ship. We'll have a lovely afternoon. Kiss the world goodbye, and away we'll fly. Destination moon. We'll travel fast as a light till we're out of sight. The earth will be like a toy balloon. What a thrill you'll get riding on my jet. A destination moon. We'll go up, 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 straight to the moon we two, high in the starry blue. I'll be out of this world with you, so away we'll steal in my space mobile, a supersonic honeymoon. Leave your cares below, pull the switch, let's go, a destination moon. We'll go up, 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 straight to the moon we two. We'll be high in the starry blue. I'll be out of this world with you. So away we'll steal in my jetmobile, a supersonic honeymoon. Leave your cares below, pull that switch, let's go. Destination, we're flying high up in the sky. Destination, destination moon.